In this episode, I'm excited to bring you a powerful conversation about resilience, financial empowerment, and healing through life's toughest situations. Today's guest is Megan Kopka, a certified financial planner and registered life planner who specializes in helping widows and caregivers find financial stability and freedom in the face of life altering events. Megan brings a wealth of knowledge and personal experience to our discussion, having navigated the complexities of widowhood herself as raising two young children as a solo parent after the loss of her husband, Keith. Megan's journey is an inspiring one, combining her professional expertise with her advocacy work for women through organizations like Modern Widows Club, where she now serves as board chair. Megan shares valuable insights into the emotional and financial challenges widows face, from managing brain fog to confronting the often overlooked widow tax. We dive deep into the importance of creating a holistic life plan, the unique hurdles women encounter when managing their finances, and how some community support can be a lifeline during times of grief. This episode is filled with practical advice, heartwarming stories, and empowering strategies for anyone navigating a major life transition or supporting someone who is. Whether you're a caregiver, a widow, or simply looking to build a more resilient financial future, Megan's wisdom will deeply resonate. So let's dive in. Welcome, Megan. It's such a joy to get to see you again, second time this month.
I know it is. It was so much better to be able to hug you and be in person. So thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah. We've met a couple of times as financial planners, and your story around focusing on widowhood, especially since it's been like a personal lived experience, really just opens up so many questions about how we care for each other or how we don't care each other. So I appreciate the volunteering that you do, the advocacy that you do, your vulnerability in sharing your story and your strength. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having an open heart for all walks of life, and your curiosity and your warmth makes it so easy to be able to share everything with you, really.
Well, can you introduce yourself as a financial planner and the work that you do with Modern Widows Club?
Sure. So I have been a certified financial planner running my own business for several years now. And what I do primarily is I write holistic life plans for caregivers and patients, so married couples that are going through the caregiving experience, and for widows. So I meet people in the spaces that I have as my personal background. I know how much easier it is to be widowed when you have your plan in place. And I always felt really fortunate that I had that for myself going into fresh widowhood. And also know that not everybody is given the time period to work out all those tough questions like I had with Keith. So I also like to come in and support people in arguably the two hardest times in life that kind of go hand in hand. So that's what I do. And the holistic financial life planning really is that arc of transition that can take up to a decade to really go from we, thinking of yourself as a married couple, to me or I. So I always say from we to me. And what lends really well in that space is I can take a really deep dive in the financial piece as well as all of the emotional and relational support that I've gone through myself through therapy, through group therapy, through EMDR, whatever I needed and have experienced, I can bring to the table as well. And through how we know each other in a very philosophical, relational space, that this is something that I think naturally we lean towards, regardless of our, well, probably emphasized by trauma, tragedy, history, whatever that history is, but also just having that openness to know that we need to really see the person. The person is at the center of the plan, and the finances and resources are just the tools that we have that acumen to be able to wrap around this beautiful life that they're going to have. So that's the other ways. The space where I work in the world is I am this year the chair of the board of directors for the Modern Widows Club. And what I love,
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you so much. What I love about the Modern Widows Club, so Keith passed away in 2014, and I found the Modern Widows Club online, doom scrolling on Facebook. Wonderful post, and I kept thinking, is this club for real? Are they this positive? And then I got to know the club even more. So after I got my CFP, I was like, okay, now it's time. So in 2019, I started a grassroots effort of a widows group, and I happened to be going to Atlanta and attended my first Modern Widows Club meeting. And I was like, this club really is for real. Like having an in person support group of people that are learning how to heal in a healthy way was fantastic. It was mind blowing. So my partner, my advocate, Kathy, and we went through the training for Modern Widows Club. And I really, over the next 4 years, got to see the club from the inside, all of their research, all of their education, all of their offerings. And I was a facilitator for my local group. So I started a community. We built a community. I did a lot of public relations to make sure the word was out. I was already linked in with all the caregiving and hospices in the area. My sister-in-law's a news anchor. So anytime there wasn't too much news, like they could put on good news, and they would do little area interest stories on us when we did things volunteering in the community. And it grew and it blossomed. But the best part was I got to see widows who came in crisis during COVID when there were no other support groups meeting. And these were fresh widows that came to us. And now 2 of them are now leading the club. So I stepped down in December of 2023 and just was like, what am I going to do with all my heart and my time and my volunteering? And Carolyn's like, I want you to be on the board. But it wasn't just that. She wanted me to be the chair. And I thought, well, that's perfect. Now, like I was saying, we can take the deep dive on finances because of who we are and what we do professionally. And what Modern Widows Club does is it identified 7 other pillars of healthy living, what people really need to home in on and learn more about when you're going through trauma, transition, tragedy, whatever it is. And it's physical health, mental health, relational health, spiritual health, fun and creativity, the arts, and finding purpose and meaning again. So I loved it. It was like, okay, I got the finance piece. I've done a lot of work in these other areas as well. And so we have evergreen material coming out in each of those, what we call the 7 pillars of healthy living. And I love it. I just absolutely love it. If there's a way to build yourself back into resilience, to find grit, to find yourself, I think this is probably the healthiest way to do it. Our entire mission essentially can be boiled down into 2 words. It's our goal to reduce suffering.
Yeah. And what I've learned from our conversations, like the way that widows are treated, the way that widows are looked at is very different than other areas. You were just talking about taking a note from how diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, is doing their work.
Yeah. So essentially, widowhood is invisible, right? I mean, we can all conjure in our head like what a widow looks like to you. And the example I always use is like when you close your eyes and you're picturing Tweety Bird's granny, the little old lady in a black dress. That's not what we look
Right.
like, right? I was 38 when I was widowed. And that's where you come up against all the things that DEI is looking for in support, right? I'm outside of the norm of what the age of a caregiver looks like. Everyone asked me if I was there for my parents. My parents are 73 and 72. And, they're vegan yogis. They're doing great. My dad's like in front of me at yoga when I saw him last month, right a week before he turned 73, and he's doing great. Like I don't worry about him getting off the floor like we do with older people. And so when I think about widowhood, where do widows go? They should go to the Modern Widows Club. Heck yeah, but does that pop up on Google? Where does it fall under in our country, in our government? Are we a part of women's health? Well, you go to the women's health, like the caucus for women, and widows aren't listed. You can look at fatherless children, health and loneliness, aging, whatever it is. There's nothing really exclusive on widowhood. And yet, all of our children are exposed to all of the issues of the fatherless. Women's health, when you are widowed, 91% of us have brain fog, and on average, it lasts for 2 years. That is a medical diagnosis. Widowhood
Wow.
is the number one most stressful life event anyone can experience, and yet we're not identified under healthcare. It's not even there. So we fit under stress. We fit under isolation. When we're worried about the elderly and the aging, one of the top things and issues that they talk about is isolation, and widows experience that too. I can say, like, I barely, other than the people that I'm related to, I don't have the same friends that Keith and I had when we were married. Your relationships change. And it's not talked about in the workplace. It's not, it's nowhere. We don't fit anywhere. And yet, if it's the hardest life event and there's a physical impact, emotional impact, economic impact, I could go on and on about, because widowhood can easily become a ticket to poverty. It becomes like somebody, if you think about changing a socioeconomic class, it's mind blowing. Whether you go up, there's a lot of pressure for stewardship and abundancy mentality. But when you go down, it is really hard to quote unquote pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's really tough. So there's all kinds of issues, and yet there's no widowhood caucus in DC. Out of everywhere that we go, there's no office for widowed persons. And yet there's all of these multiple societal issues of people that are really at risk.
When I start talking with financial experts who center social justice, I love to ask, how did the financial background of your childhood impact the work you do today, if at all?
As far as my childhood goes, I started working really young. I remember my parents were always people who said, we can't afford that. And so I became a mother's helper as early as first grade and started earning money as a babysitter in third, fourth, fifth grade. I always had babysitting going on until I got my first job at 15. So I always wanted to have my own money because of the we can't afford that statement. And when things were really a big deal in our house, and my parents knew that it was a big deal, like I had the opportunity to go on vacation with another friend's family. And my parents would say, well, we'll find a way to make that happen. So I always knew that money was tight for them, but I also knew if there was something that they really felt could broaden my horizons, that they would make it happen. It was important to them to instill their value of education in both my brother and me by providing us with 4 years of college education. So I get it. Like, I get why things were tight. They were future thinking and really kind of had all of their dollars allocated. So I appreciate that. And I will say the we can't afford that carried into my mentality for a long time. I mean, I definitely did things to combat that, but I was married young too. I had dependents. I was able to stay at home for a while. I chose having a tight lifestyle to have a parent in the home. So we made our choices for sure. And as soon as Keith got sick, it's like we can't afford that, just goes out the window. We can't afford not to do that. He was on a shortened timeline and he worked hard, and I wanted to really embrace living large and doing whatever was on his bucket list and making everything possible. And so we called them Keith's legacy years, or we called it his retirement years. So it really brought a pivotal shift in my life to understand that if you believe that money can come to you in abundance, that it does. And that was a life lesson. I filled out a lot of grant applications. I didn't know if I was going to end up having to move in with my parents with a whole family, because my breadwinner, was going to get Social Security income only. And then the caregiving needs were so high that I went from my full-time job and started working less and less and less. And it wasn't sustainable, right? But I knew he had a 3 to 5 year timeline and it wasn't sustainable. Every time, Diana, every single time I got worried about money, I would go to the mailbox and there'd be a check in the mail. What?
That's incredible.
Yes. So, like, Johnny and Friends is a nonprofit organization formed by a woman who lived her life in a wheelchair. So, I wrote a grant application to them, but at the time, like, Keith was sick in 2010. The financial crisis was right behind us, and nonprofits were really hurting. They had frozen their funds when I first applied. And so, Keith was diagnosed in 2010. He passed away in 2014. I don't remember when I got that check, but I want to say it was like 2012 or 2013. It wasn't when I applied for it, but when the funds were released, I was accepted and the check came in the mail. So as things towards the end of his life were getting tighter, we just were really blessed with a lot of great things. Now, mind you, I made those things happen, you know,
You
but
applied for the grants.
right, I
You
didn't just,
looked great. You let people know.
but like every time I freaked out about money, I go back and I think about money isn't the problem. If money could fix Keith, you know, would there be enough, And so it was bigger than money. It was really about humbling yourself and finding the resources in the community and being able to ask for help. So that's a huge tip that I would give to anyone who's caregiving or even in early widowhood. When people ask how they can help, please have a list of 5 things to do.
Wow.
Keep a
That's
list. Yeah. Keep that list of 5 things to do, like on your kitchen cabinet or inside your kitchen cabinet on a sticky note. Like, would you be able to take the dog for a walk on this particular day that I'm out of the house all day? Or would you be able to come over and get up on the ladder or at least hold the ladder for me? I mean, there's a lot of things that are like 2 people jobs. My brother-in-law mowed my lawn for probably a year, maybe even 2 after Keith passed away. And then, I finally got the gumption to do it myself, So sometimes people just help out. And then other times you really do need to ask. A lot of people will just say, call me if you need something. And that's a really tough thing for people to do because usually by the time we're ready to ask, it's so many things that you really can't even articulate it without wanting to just like be like, oh my gosh, I'm too much of a basket case. Like I'm unhelpable, right? So, so yeah, little tasks is truly a blessing. People really do want to help. I know my neighbor down the road, ironically, his wife was diagnosed with ALS. And when I went down to visit, I just chopped up a bunch of fruit. People have a tendency to bring comfort food. And I was like, I want to bring them fresh, healthy food. And
Yeah.
chopping fruit is time consuming, but what a gift, right? So,
Yeah, that's really good advice of just like have 5 things that are ready for other people to help because people want to help and a lot of the times we're not sure how,
mhm.
right? And it makes it a little bit easier to ask for that support. So there's a couple of different things that are coming through my mind. It's the conversation we had on how widowhood impacts women versus men.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember you said that men get married, was it within 2 years that they were already repartnered?
Yeah, so there's some gender sensitivity there, right? I mean, we
Right.
all have a spectrum of masculine and feminine traits, but if we look at it across the genders, I just looked up these statistics. I'm so glad you brought that up. The remarriage rate inside of 2 years, 19% of widowed women are repartnered in 2 years. 61% of widowers, of men that experience the loss, are remarried within 2 years. And, there's a lot of magic to some of the rules that we have that are based on 2 years. So, filing for qualified survivor now, it used to be the tax filing status called qualified widow, is now called qualified survivor. That is a 2 year time period, which is based off of the statistics on how quickly men remarry.
So after you become a widow, it's basically getting the same treatment as married filing jointly.
Mhm.
and it fades out after 2 years, even if your economic situation hasn't changed.
So there's a caveat to that. So if you are widowed, the year you are widowed, you are married filing jointly. The only way you qualify as a qualified survivor is if you have dependents in the home. So that's a big caveat too, because otherwise you go from married filing jointly straight out to single filer the following year, even if your spouse passed away December 29th or 30th, you know.
Wow. So there's like a weird economic penalty tax wise.
Oh, big time. It's actually called the widow tax. Yes. Yes.
The widow tax.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Before
Yikes.
we go down that, let me just give you a little bit more statistics. Starting at age 40. So when a widow becomes widowed at 40, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to exclude the 20s and the 30s because I fell into the 30s and God help me, I look at the people in the 20s and think about the financial side right now. Survivor benefits. Do they have 40 quarters? Right? What if they were young moms and they were married to a 25-year-old? So there's some stickiness in there. Okay, so back to this. So 40, about 1% of women at age 40 are widowed. And when you get up to age 80, it's like 73% of women in the population over 80 are widowed. And so it goes up exponentially throughout time. And I just wanted to kind of put that out there that we're talking about a very small number of the female population when you're under 40 that are widowed. And that's usually, you know, widowed with dependents seems to be a bit unusual, but the average age of a widow is 59 years old. It's it's likely today that the 59-year-olds might have dependents in college. And so like I really want people to think about like what does 59 look like? You're 5 or 10 years away from retirement. You probably have two incomes. Maybe that's new, maybe it's not. But as a financial advisor, I know I'm talking to people in their late 50s, early 60s about maximizing 401ks, like college payments are done, like let's get more in here. And all of a sudden you find yourself at least with a 40% decrease in income when you become widowed. So those are
Yeah.
kind of some of the statistics behind it. So who qualifies and who gets penalized for being treated like, hey, you get 2 years to remarry. But I think society is more comfortable with people being married, right? So,
Yeah. And it's also so if most widows are 59, those are often your highest earning years,
mhm,
right? And if you have this incredibly painful transition and also the caregiving that might have gone before it,
right,
it's getting in the way of you being able to save as much as you need to for other goals.
exactly. And then you have to think about too the impact of widowhood on you mentally, physically. Like I said, brain fog. Does your employer want to employ someone with brain fog for 2 years? You know, are you keeping your job? Did you lose a job? Are you employable again? A lot of widows do go back into the workforce if they, you know, and or stay in the workforce. So there's a lot of adjustment period that goes on. And I don't want to say like we're not capable to function out in the world as humans. I mean, I worked the entire time. I had, you know, two very active teenagers and proms and, you know, all kinds of stuff going on. So very, very full life, a very full life. And also dealing with all of the catastrophic thinking and emotional upheaval despite the financial piece being down, you know, that done.
You were a financial planner when all of this happened, right? So you worked in finances. You had been able to put your own oxygen mask financially ahead of time. But
Mhm.
so few of us outside of this profession actually take the time to do that or have the resources to do so.
Correct, which is why I spent a lot of time volunteering with widows about finances because I'm sure you've experienced it as I did before caregiving and widowhood being in finances. People are really uncomfortable with money. I don't know why. You know, like I know like we all try and get it and everything and we experience it all the time. And I'm sure you can imagine widows, I mean, when I work with women in general, I remember giving a conference talk to a women's group, and there are about 150 women. And one came up to me afterwards and was like, I'm so glad my husband takes care of all this. Because I did an hour and a half long presentation on holistic planning of all the facets from insurances to cash flow to taxes, and just a little debrief on like 7 different categories that we call personal finance. You cannot get away from this stuff, except for, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, a lot of women defer that to their husbands. They might write the checks and hold the purse strings for the bills or things, but maybe they defer all the insurance paperwork to the insurance agent and their husband handles that. And maybe their husband sees the CPA, and maybe their husband sees the financial advisor. So they keep themselves out of some of the things that are crucial. Like, you have to take care of risk management, right? We have to have car insurance. You likely have homeowners insurance, all of those things. Like, and now you're learning it for the first time, brand new to it, and arguably the hardest time of your life. And so my
Right.
heart really goes out, and I want to like get it, align yourself with a professional, get the help that you need. It's so important. It's a really hard time to learn and be fresh to all of these things.
Yeah, especially with the brain fog you were talking about. And that's really common that when there's financial stress, your IQ drops. And when there's this deep grief that you're going through, it's even harder to like follow these very complex money rules. But I mean, yes, definitely a lot of women have like they outsource that side of their life.
Mhm.
And it can be really, like you said, it can be really sad when you see the other side of it, when you're like, okay, well, now you need to learn how to do these things and no one is here to help you. But there's always financial planners, right? And I know one of the programs that you support is Wings for Widows. Is that through the Modern Widows Club?
No, it's actually it's a deep dive into the financial pillar. So Wings for Widows is a separate nonprofit organization. They have financial coaches that they assign to widows. And the financial coaches have to be CFPs. So you're working with fresh widows, and you are a CFP, but it is financial coaching, not like I'm delivering you a full financial plan. And they've got a really good way to work through the resources, like pulling the credit report and those types of things. So you have an accountability partner. And I just say, like, all the time, you do not have to go through this alone, right? Like, there are people to partner with. There's some, Wings for Widows is one of them. Modern Widows Club offers a lot of education on the broadness of everything, but Wings for Widows assigns you that personal coach. And I would encourage every widow, I've said this many times in the speeches that I've given, and is that I really feel strongly that a widow needs 2 professionals in her corner straight away. One is a grief therapist, and the other is a CFP. And your CFP has to be someone who's written holistic plans, that has the time to be able to meet a widow where she is.
Yeah, that reminds me of Dick Wagner, who was one of the main people at Nazareth, where you and I have met. Dick Wagner talked about financial planners being modern day priests in some ways because we're talking with people about all aspects of their life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe not their spiritual life so much, but we need to be well versed in all of the different conversations that people are going through. And then have you also gone through the Transitionist Institute?
I start in November.
You start in November.
Yes, so funny. I knew I wanted my registered life planning certificate, and I wanted my transitionist certificate as well.
Mhm.
And so I interviewed a couple financial planners who had both, and just kind of got their input on what should I do first. And just from hearing them talk, I knew that it was time for me. I was in year 8 after being widowed. I knew it was time for me to really home in and focus on the new me that I was really getting to know. And so I built my life plan first, and I'm living it. I believe in leading before asking someone to follow along. So I've done all the work that I now give out, and the transitionist piece, I'm so excited to start. I've followed Susan's book is probably one of the first. The Sudden Money book was probably one of the
Yeah,
first
Susan
books
Bradley.
I ever bought and read, and I loved it. So yeah, I remember her when I finally met her. It's like, oh wow, she doesn't disappoint either. You know, you meet one of your heroes and she's so lovely and really
She is
into the
very
research and
lovely.
engaging. And I'll say too, like, that's one of the things that I valued so much about Modern Widows Club. It's so deep in research and data and trying to get things right from not just the academic point, which feeds my soul, right? Like my two highest values are like motherhood and education, right? So but it's also how to just really convey and get the emotional buy-in from somebody, the excitement and helping clients really see the value. And I just love it. I can't wait. So I'm so excited.
Yeah. And for people who are listening who are not deep into financial planning terminology, so you talked about life planning, right? We're both registered life planners. For myself too, when I went through the registered life planning training, I started to live out my like life plan and I'm in it now. It feels really good. And then for the sudden money, the transitionist work, that's really the idea that we're always kind of in some type of transition. I haven't taken that training either. I'm kind of I'll hear how it goes for you and then I'll ask you and see if I'm ready to start that. But
Yeah.
what I really enjoy about Susan Bradley's work is that she gives you so much permission to be where you're at. And that was one of the things also in doing the life plan that sometimes you can't ask people, where do you see yourself in 5 years if they lost their partner 3 weeks ago?
Right.
You know, like you, there's no way. It's more too painful.
Right. And that's a really great point because a lot of life planners will stay in the ground that life planning is good and it's ready and accessible for everyone at every time. And I still say, no, I was having an identity crisis, and I don't think going through life planning when you're in an identity crisis makes sense at all those words I just said are in complete conflict with each other. Like, it's, I think, almost cruel when you ask somebody that has just jumped the rail on where they thought their life was going to be to, if they feel like they've hit a wall, that there is no path in front of them. They can't see it at all. And that takes a lot of time. And so Susan's work, I actually use one of her slides in my presentation about just, the circles of going through that life transition. And statistically, what they've researched is that transitions on average take 4 to 6 years. And I was like, oh, well, what we've researched in Modern Widows Club is this transition takes 7 years. And I was like, oh, okay. So on average, it makes sense that widowhood would be an outlier, but that's still an average. And I went to a women's summit put on by Dimensional, right? And somebody said, and she kind of asked a question about widowhood, and she's like, well, we've all experienced it. You know that the woman who's sitting in front of you is not herself or her future self for a good 5 or 10 years. And she stated that like it was a fact. And I'm like, that is a fact. If the average is 7, 5 to 10, that makes so much sense to me based on everything that I've learned. Now, do we have a gigantic pool of widows that we've surveyed about this? No, and the only gigantic pool that you could pull would be getting access through the Modern Widows Club. I would say we have the largest reach to widows if you wanted to do a research than any other organization out there. So
And it's international, right?
it is, yeah. We have a couple communities overseas. The first one was in Kenya. So one's in Israel, and I can't remember. There's another one in Eastern Europe. I can't remember which country.
Yeah. Because there's something when I'm thinking about like the way that being a woman is treated across the entire world. We live like maybe not every place in the world is very patriarchal, but I know I living in Mexico, there's a lot of patriarchy, there's a lot of misogyny. And as a woman, like when you have a partner, maybe your place in life feels more solid
Mhm.
because we also talked about a divorcee versus a widower and the different ways that those are treated. the different ways they're looked at?
Yeah, I let's see how we can get into this topic. So, I mean, you and I both know from our financial background that marriage is a legally and financially binding contract. And it in the US and many other countries, you are taxed differently. I mean, there's so many different things without even talking about social status of how marriage elevates you as a woman. Before the equal rights movement, before women got the right to vote, your status was based on who you were born into, what your father did, what your father's money was like, or how well your father married, right? The whole dowry system. There's also that idea works the other way, right? Prohibition happened because of women that were married to alcoholics. So I forget the lady's name, but she was known as the hatchet that went in and chopped up the bar where her husband was always served. He spent his entire paycheck there and didn't bring it home to the family. So I always say, like, your marriage could be your kite, it could elevate you, or it could be your anchor. It could really pull you down. And unmarried, you have a whole new social status of what happens to you. And this is where I really emphasize that widowhood becomes invisible. You can move a socioeconomic status, but even so, like, your relationships change, right? A lot of people will talk about being unpartnered, whether you're widowed or divorced, and what does it look like in your friends group? In the divorce, they're like, okay, who gets the friends? Like, it's almost an ongoing, fodder for a comedian. But a lot of women, like, it's like, I don't want your husband. Please, don't worry about me around your husband. I valued marriage to such a high level. Like, it doesn't make me want to be with a married man. Do I want to get married again? From a legal and financial standpoint, the answer is probably no, but I miss being married. I had a really great, loving friendship in my marriage. But again, like, I'll never have another father of my children, those types of things. So that it's a whole new ball game in a world that we don't explore enough because there aren't programs for us. There just aren't. I mean, even if you look at a program like Grief Share, it's offered through the Christian churches. Grief Share, you can go and type it in and find like 10 churches in your immediate area that offers a support for people who are grieving. And it's for people who are grieving. It is not specific to widows. So they have 13 courses. Usually you pay for the workbook, and the church provides facilitators and a space for you to meet, which is great because a space for you to meet, I know from Modern Widows Club, is a hard thing to come by. So churches have a lot of vacancies throughout the week, and they're buildings that sit empty, just like office buildings on the weekend kind of thing. So that's wonderful, but you're in a room with people who may have lost their parents or their children. It's a different impact of grief versus, your partnership, your financial partner, your intimacy partner, your parent partner, that loss of a household management partner, right? Someone who, if you have an insurance claim, that will remind you to call, or, hey, I'll make the call since you weren't able to today. You've lost that entire conversation partner in all facets of your life. And so that's a little bit different. And although I appreciated Grief Share for what it was, it gave me a great vocabulary about grief and helps me normalize my experience with a group of other people that were struggling. It's wonderful in its own regard. Grief Share has a sister program, or, a program called Divorce Share. And so you think about it, like, that is specific to divorcees on how to get through this process of unraveling your marriage. There's only two ways out of marriage. Both of them are very, very difficult. And so although they have Grief Share, there's very few programs that talk to you about finding your grit, being a resilient person in adversity when it comes to losing your spouse, other than Modern Widows Club. There's other institutions, there's other nonprofits that do things like meet and greets, or they offer educational pop ups and conferences for widows and widowers. But the research, the education, the ongoing openness of communities to be able to hold space for one another and dig a little bit deeper and also personalize these experiences. I've never seen anything like the Modern Widows Club. When people say, oh, there's no course book on widowhood, I'm like, well, there kind of is. Because we're a nonprofit, we have to be able to report our impact. So we have to have outcomes. And so we offer a free course. It's the Hope course. So we identified 4 areas of widowhood. It's not based on tenure, it's based on your personal experience where you are at the time. So we have this widow empowerment quiz, and you will get placed into hope, heal, grow, or lead. So those are the 4 areas. And we actually take a deep dive on virtual programs on here's a hope course and here's a taste on one of all the 7 pillars. Here's your heal course. Here's a little taste on all the 7 pillars for this particular part of healing. When you're ready to grow, we do the same thing again. All 7 pillars are touched on a deeper level. And essentially, everyone in grow is hoping to get to lead, right? And so it's a
That's so
continuum.
And that's so beautiful. It's making me think there's this quote that I love that's a big North Star for my activism. It's from Lila Watson. She's an Aboriginal artist and professor in Australia. And she says, if you have come to help me, then you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together.
Woo!
And
I just got goosebumps everywhere. Yes.
And I hear that in your work with the Modern Widows Club. I hear that in the grassroots advocacy. I mean, when I met you and Carolyn was talking about some of the different programs that you do that are very kind of like they feel very magical, like psychologically magical. That space of allowing the person to be fully where they are, not so much because you're trying to heal them, but because them doing well, a fellow widow doing well is good for all widows, but it's good for all of society, especially if like people are feeling very like what you were saying, that it's a very that people don't see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's a hidden place of being. When you think of divorcees, and I think 70% of divorces are started by women, like women are often the ones to leave.
Yep.
There's some sense of like empower them. But with widowhood, whether or not the marriage was as beautiful as yours, there's this grief. And as a society, we tend to be very allergic to grief, right? So I hear this program being a lot about self empowerment because I imagine that, like yourself, the widows that go through come on the other side being support for other widows, right? It's like a very upward spiral program.
Exactly right. And we have a motto inside a Modern Widows Club, and it's reaching back while moving forward. Reaching back while moving forward. And there are 2 things based on resilience science. This is off the work of Dr. Stephen Southwick out of Yale University. He's since passed away. He actually passed away, I think, about a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago now. Modern Widows Club was quoted in a Wall Street Journal article that was his, based on his work in resilience. We didn't even know who he was. He wrote a book on resilience science, and in his 3rd edition, were mentioned quite a bit. And so Carolyn befriended Dr. Southwick. And what he found was that there are 2 things in building resilience that you cannot get from within. One is you have to find your tribe. You need a group of people that are going through a similar experience as you, where you can share life hacks and, experiences. And I don't ever want to misconstrue it with misery loves company, because inside my community and our support group, I don't think I've gone to a meeting where I haven't cried, but I also haven't gone to a meeting where I haven't laughed. It is a joy. It is sunshine. It is warmth. And it
It's
is,
the full human
yes,
experience, it sounds like.
yes. And it's also a shoulder to cry on too, where you get your squishy hugs. I mean, that's one thing that I found too in widowhood is that you're starved for personal touch, right? So that's part of it. And then along with finding your tribe, the second thing is you need a mentor. And so, one of the questions you had asked was finding historical information on widows. And I think it was in 2021, we started our legendary widows. And of course, it was January of like 2021, COVID lockdown. It's like, okay, cool. I've got a new thing to read about. And the new thing was legendary widows. And January of 2021, our legendary widow was Coretta Scott King. So when you think about the impact of what happens to you and what your life can become, that impact of legacy or memorializing someone. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. died at 38 years old, leaving 4 children, right? So Coretta Scott King was a young mother at the time. And look what she did with her life. We have a national holiday actually celebrating equality because of his work and her work that continued after he died. And it's just, to me, one of the most beautiful and amazing things to really sit and think about how your legacy will play out and how love is everlasting. They worked on a combined mission, and she took that out of the United States, brought it to the world. She took it out of all the colors of our skin, right? And she brought it to the LGBTQ community as well. It was an inclusive environment, and what a legacy of love, literally and figuratively, for them. It's mind blowing to me. And there's so many examples of that, of what we get to do in rebuilding and shaping our own lives, myself included. I am the woman I am today because Keith loved me. He married me and made me his wife. He made me a mother, and he also made me a widow. And it's through great love and through great loss that I've become and serve in the capacity where I serve. And when you talked about, our liberations are connected, I feel that throughout my entire body, the energy that went through me, it's like, yes, I love that quote. What was her first name? I remember Watson.
Lilla Watson.
Lila Watson. I will look that up. That might go into my next speech for sure.
Yeah, because sometimes there's this idea, especially when we're talking about social justice, like there's someone that's going to come from the outside and make it better. There's like, and yes, we do want laws to be different. Like, and that's one of the questions I have for you. If you could like wave a magic wand, what are like the top 3 things you would want to see in law? But at the end of the day, like we as individuals also need to own our power to make change.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some experiences where like yes, we can share grief in different ways, but there's some experiences that we can't because I'm not a widow,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just respecting that and also knowing that there are places where we can each get what we need. But let's go to the question I hinted at. Like if you could wave a magic wand or get your way with politics, what are the top 3 to 5 things that you would want to see changed?
Okay. So I want to first say, to back up a little bit and just say, thank you because you helped me with my legacy and my passion and purpose in life by just opening this platform, right? So I can affect change one on one with a widow, and I can affect change educating and talking in our sphere with financial advisors. After my friend Robert passed away, I realized if I wanted to make a bigger impact when there's only one of me, I can make a bigger impact inside of our field for people to understand and maybe do a better job. At least try and stop the badness of financial planning with widows. And so, I can't thank you enough because I know when you work with a widow, you'll have more information you have me as support and can always reach out to. But it means a lot to me. And that's the change I'm trying to make, not just one on one with a widow, but one on one with another financial planner so they can go help 100 widows in a career lifetime. And it's still not enough. So, the three major changes I'd like to see, there's something like, as far as our regulations go, I feel like we've talked about this a little bit, but I'd like our regulations to actually match the research and statistics. Like, does it make sense that we only have qualified widows for 2 years? It, to me, is likely that a widow with dependents is going to have a really hard time finding someone to marry her and adopt her children. And then there's all kinds of things that we haven't talked about that you and I know about in the financial industry. And that's, does she lose her pension if she gets remarried? There's a lot of penalties for remarrying. And I just feel like you can't have it both ways. You can't have a society that holds marriage up here and ignores widowhood completely, and then also penalizes people for getting married. And it also penalizes us as the widow tax. And so I'd like to see that extended, like a married filing jointly for 2 years, right? Like, we're talking about helping middle and lower America widows. It could really make a difference for people that are in tragedy and trauma, and probably not hurt the income of the US government astronomically. And so, like, having that 2 year qualified widow, maybe that makes sense for our older widows so they can do more financial planning and reposition themselves better. Because the widow tax, like when it comes to the older widows that are collecting their RMDs, it's a cliff to go from married filing jointly to boom, like I still have the same RMDs, but now there's only one of me. And then I think I mentioned too before, having a widowhood caucus in DC would be huge. And so I really would like to think about that more too, because we would be able to better support and have the ideas and the wherewithal to make those major decisions if we had an office of widowed persons. And I don't know if that's in the Department of Health and Human Services, or like, where is that going to fall? But where could we find better support and consideration for younger survivors with dependents in the home, especially the civilians? So military widows, actually, I think they went through 12 years of getting MOA, the military, and I don't remember what it stands for, but better treatment and benefits. It took them 12 years, but they got it. And the military widows have more support structure than any other widows throughout our country. And so having that caucus in DC and actually borrowing from the military would serve the larger demographic of widows at large. And then also just the under-researched, all these things that aren't addressed, like not fitting under women's health care, not being recognized for fatherless children, all the support going to the kids, when we know, I mean, we know this from literacy. When you educate a woman, you educate a community. Well, what happens if you support a widow with all these issues of fatherless, children? Well, they weren't always fatherless. Can we see better impact and outcomes in those houses when the mother is dying to put the oxygen mask on herself first before she can help her children, right? It's an impact of grief inside the household. And there are grieving centers throughout the country. There was not one for my children. The small amount of services we had ended at 8th grade. So for my kids went unserved in arguably the hardest years of their lives, right? They were teenagers. They were 14 and 18 when their dad passed away, and there was nothing for us in our hometown. So I think having a widow caucus would help that quite a bit. And then the third one I would do, this is so easy and it makes me so angry how easy it is, but there's $135 million of miscalculated survivor benefits that the Social Security Administration is just retaining. They have identified all the survivors that they miscalculated based on bad information given by their employees. And There's actually a class
Wow.
action lawsuit that's occurring for people to join, but then the attorneys get all the money. I just worked with one of my survivors has an adult dependent child. Her husband passed away in 2015. And this year he got a six-figure check because he was on SSI as an adult dependent, like he's special needs. So he was on SSI when he actually qualified for his dad's survivor benefit. And they went back and they back paid him for 8 years.
Wow.
But widows and they made an administrative mistake aren't being back paid. So that's another thing that I would like to see changed. Yeah.
Wow, that's huge. 135 million that could be given out that could like create more stability for people.
Mhm.
Wow, that's
Yeah. And
huge.
to just give people like a little bit of an idea, there's about 12 million widows in the US currently. 2,800 women become widows every day. So that 135 million, that's it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that really impacted me last time we saw each other, you shared how your daughter actually got to go to the Modern Widows Club. There was like an event that she got to attend, and that it gave her more information, or it gave her like a wider scope on how to see you as a widow. And I'd love for you to share for anyone who's listening that has a widow in their life. What are things that sometimes people don't see about them that you wish they did?
It's really a great question and super loaded with Jaden. Jaden attended her first Widows Empowerment event. It was live. I flew her to Houston to be with me for a couple-day conference that was put on by the Modern Widows Club. And they have a legacy club for our daughters. And so our daughters can actually go and talk about their dads, just like I can talk about Keith presently with all my widowed friends. She can talk about her dad and also gripe about the things that they saw in their mother and how can your mom not be there for you, right? Like they get to have their own space and they should. Like how awful for her because I feel like she didn't just lose her dad, she lost both of us. She lost both of us. I like to look back and think, oh, I was strong and I just put one foot in front of the other. But I was really checked out as a parent. And, mothers and daughters, Jay from 14 and then attending at 21, that's a lifetime. That's a 7-year cycle of her young womanhood with mom who's not really fully there or understanding who she is. And I'm her primary role model, really grappling at self-confidence again, something I thought I would never struggle with, honestly. And there I am, and she's got a front row seat to my grieving while she is grieving too. And she's going through all of the tween teen stuff as well. So there is a lot of support in Modern Widows Club, not just for me, but for anybody, our friends, our family members. When you go to the Modern Widows Club website, you can click on and sign up for a 6-month newsletter that's called, I think it asks, are you a widow supporter? So you get on the widow supporter newsletter. It will not come to you for a lifetime. It is 6 newsletters, and it does track the 7 pillars of healthy living. I signed up for it twice just to, read and reread. How can I help a widow that I want to support, I know, and I love on a physical basis? What is she working on? What is she struggling with? Asking someone, how'd you sleep last night? You can share your hack like, oh, I struggle too. Did you get the Calm app or, have you tried anything? Like, would you like to borrow my, white noise maker or something? It didn't work for me. How about a weighted blanket? Like I gave my weighted blanket away. It didn't work for me, but like I'm trying everything. So, I know we have a propensity to want to solve things and support and support. And the best thing you can do, I would say, is share stories with their loved ones. I love hearing stories about Keith that I didn't know. I had a girlfriend over
Mm,
Labor Day when we were together texting me old pictures of the kids from
yeah.
when they were 3 and 4 years old on the camping trip that we always took. And I was like, how is this? Like, this is pre-Facebook. Like, how is this coming up for her over Labor Day? And maybe it's just that she's just thinking about us. But it warms my heart. It really does, to go back and to look at the times that we spent together. And that was my friend from Boston. The last time I saw her was at Keith's funeral. So it's, it means a lot to say their name, send pictures, share stories. And then for everything else, I would highly recommend getting on the newsletter. And, in our industry too, ask for more widow support. Kathy Balasek is a professor, a university professor that has built her own business, where she comes and she talks at our conferences and teaches us how to grief speak, how to avoid that elephant in the room. The latest I saw her do a little reel on was, instead of asking someone if they're married or, how's your husband? Because somebody asked me maybe 6 months after Keith died, they're like, how's Keith doing? And I'm like, still dead. It's like, when you answer that you're widowed, I forget I think Kathy puts it. She goes, oh, I can clear a room. And I always say, I can suck the air out of a
Oh,
room, right?
yeah.
So she's like, just ask them, so how's your family? Right? Like, you can just kind of change your words just a little bit to learn about someone new. Or like in my case, somebody didn't know that Keith had died. So when they asked about him, they were still thinking he was in his terminal illness. So I just think, better ways. And if we start asking, if we start researching and looking into to becoming more sensitive, even I learned from the death doula from Rose at our conference, that even talking about legacy, instead of using legacy, which is a word that is really deep with a lot of patriarchy and, white whiteness, using things like memorializing. I have a lot of clients that don't think that they should have a trust just because of the word trust. And I'm like, it's just an entity. But we think trust fund baby, like, oh, I'm not building that for my kids. And it's no, but it's a whole legal entity. And in your state, it makes a lot of sense, right? So we're not going to change that language by any means, because that is definitely deep in our Latin friends arena of the legal world. But I do think that, being a widow supporter means you do a little bit of learning too. I mean, if you really cared about the person that's in front of you, then it's not too much to get a 6 month, once a month newsletter.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful resource. That's so helpful. And you mentioned that like you can suck the air out of a room, right? Like grief can do that. Like we don't know as a society how to handle it. We just think, and that actually can make it worse, I imagine, because when there's silence around a topic that's really big for you, like it's got to be very, very confusing. So thanks for sharing those resources.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. My goodness. Yeah. Thanks for being willing to learn.
Well, thank you, Megan, for your time today. As we're wrapping up, is there anything else that you want to share with people?
Oh, I would just, if you can, spend a little bit of time on Modern Widows Club website. There is the impact report. That is our research. And I think that's what will help debunk some myths that we have about death, dying, and bereavement, and what it's like to live as a survivor. So that would be it for me. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I'll make sure to include all of this in the show notes. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your work.
Thank you for yours. I appreciate it. It's been amazing. I love seeing you again.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Highly Sensitive Money. It was wonderful to explore resilience, financial empowerment, and healing through life transitions with my good friend Megan. I hope you found the conversation as insightful and valuable as I did. I hope you found the conversation as insightful and valuable as I did. Remember, building a strong financial foundation is not just about the numbers. It's about aligning your money decisions with your personal values and experiences. If you're enjoying these episodes, please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It really helps others discover these conversations and grow our community of sensitive, thoughtful individuals working towards financial well being. You can also visit my website at allthecolors.net for more resources and a fun quiz on money architects that will help you better understand your relationship with money. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll continue to explore more topics at the intersection of money, social justice, and personal growth. all through the lens of being highly sensitive. I'm grateful to have you on this journey. Take care and talk soon.